My brother secretly controlled my life for years, psychological Reddit story with a dark twist. When I was a kid, our house was a quiet place. Not in the peaceful sense, but in the kind of silence that hides too much. We weren't a loud family. No shouting. No ladder echoing off the walls, just the soft hum of routine and the occasional creak of the floorboards. My parents weren't distant exactly. They provided, they checked homework, they remembered birthdays. But affection was rationed, like a precious resource they were always afraid of running out. And then there was my older brother, Liam. 4 years older, tall before his time, calm in a way that made teachers love him and neighbors nod approvingly when he passed by. He was the golden child, though no one ever said it out loud. He played piano, earned straight A's, volunteered on weekends. But even as a kid, I sensed something about him was too perfect. Like he was performing the idea of a son rather than just being one. Still, I looked up to him. I copied the way he tied his shoelaces, the way he packed his backpack, the way he smiled at people like he knew something they didn't. When he left for college, the house became even quieter. My parents worked more, or maybe they were just around less. I filled the space with noise, music, movies, anything to distract from the echo of his absence. But every time he called home, every holiday visit, he brought with him that same air of control. Nothing out of place. Stories from university always polished, friends always wonderful, professors always impressed. He never mentioned struggles. He never slipped. And maybe that's why I missed the signs. When I turned 20 and moved to the city for school, I ended up closer to him than I'd ever been in years. He'd graduated and taken a job downtown, a respectable company in a glass building with a lobby that smelled like expensive perfume. We started meeting for coffee, sometimes dinner occasionally. He was generous, always paid, always listened, and still always perfect. Until one rainy Tuesday evening, when he didn't show up to our usual cafe. No text, no call, just silence. I waited an hour, called him twice, and walked home with a sick feeling in my stomach I couldn't explain. The next day, he texted, "Sorry, got caught up with work, rain check." That was the first crack. Small, forgettable. But it was the beginning. I started noticing little inconsistencies. Stories he told twice with different details. Receipts in his car for places he said he never went. A strange hesitation when I asked about his job. I told myself I was overthinking it. He was my brother. He had always been solid, reliable, boring even. But doubt is a disease, and once it infects you, it spreads fast. I tried to ignore it until I couldn't. One weekend, when he went on a supposed business trip, I decided to visit his apartment. I told myself I just wanted to drop a book he'd asked to borrow. That was the excuse. But deep down, I was looking for something. I didn't know what, but I was sure it was there. His place was immaculate, as always. Shoes lined up by the door, dishes stacked neatly, no dust on the shelves. But then I opened a drawer in his desk and found a locked metal box. My heart started pounding. It felt ridiculous, like a movie cliché. Who keeps a locked box anymore? And yet there it was. I didn't try to open it that day. I just stared at it, memorized its weight and the sound it made when I set it back down. I left his apartment without touching anything else, but my mind was already racing. Over the next few weeks I visited again. Once when he was at work, once when he was out of town. The box stayed where it was, taunting me until finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I borrowed a small lock, pick set from a friend who was into that kind of thing. It took me 3 tries, and when it clicked open, my stomach turned to ice. Inside were stacks of envelopes, each labeled with a name and a date. Some I recognized. Old friends, family members. Others meant nothing to me. And each envelope contained a letter. Some typed, some handwritten, all confessions. Dark, detailed confessions. Affairs, manipulation. One told of how he'd ruined someone's career with a calculated rumor. Another explained how he'd faked a medical emergency to get out of legal trouble. Each one ended the same way, a quiet, cold signature. Liam. I sat there for what felt like hours, reading the truth about a person I thought I knew better than anyone. My hands shook. I kept thinking maybe it's fiction. Maybe he's writing stories, practicing for a novel. But deep down, I knew. The handwriting was real. The dates were too precise. The details too intimate. These were records. Confessions not for guilt or catharsis, but trophies. I felt sick. The next time we met, I pretended nothing had happened. We had brunch, like always. He laughed, made jokes, asked about my classes. But I couldn't stop staring at his hands. Those same hands that had written those letters. Those same hands that had built a life on lies. He must have sensed something, because his smile faltered once or twice. A flicker of doubt in his otherwise calm facade. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to scream. But something held me back. Fear, maybe. Or the grim curiosity of what he'd do next. That was when I began tracking him. Nothing too dramatic, just keeping tabs. Watching his patterns. Noting discrepancies. I started building my own little file. I told myself it was for my own safety. Maybe it was. Maybe it was revenge. Either way, it felt like I was peeling back layers of a life that had always been just out of reach. I followed him once, all the way to a rundown building on the edge of the city. Not the kind of place someone like Liam would be caught dead in. He entered through a side door and didn't come out for hours. When he did, he was different. Disheveled, almost frantic. He didn't see me. I stayed hidden. But I recorded the time, the location, the look on his face. I started visiting that building myself. In the daylight, pretending to be lost. Sometimes making up stories to the residents to let me inside. It wasn't a residence at all. It was a kind of private club, or maybe a front for something else. Nothing illegal that I could prove. But the people there, they knew him. They called him by a different name. When I asked casually, pretending to be new, someone said, "Oh, you mean Jack?" "Yeah, he's one of the founders." My blood froze. Jack, my brother, had a whole other identity. A whole life, and I had no idea why, or what it meant. But that was the moment I knew the truth was much worse than I thought. Liam wasn't just lying to others. He was lying to everyone, including me. And whatever secrets he was hiding, they were only getting darker. He had called himself Jack. That name echoed in my head for days after I left that building. Jack wasn't a nickname. It wasn't short for Lam or some inside joke. It was a full, living persona. And the people in that dim, smoke-heavy room knew him only by that name. The way they said it, half respect, half wariness, told me more than I was ready to understand. I went home that night with a pit in my stomach and a racing heart, wondering how many years I'd spent living in the shadow of a stranger. What else didn't I know? How many lives was he living? I started digging, obsessively. It began with public records, searching for that name, Jack. Tied to his email, his phone, anything I could think of. For weeks, I found nothing. But then I remembered a slip of paper I'd seen once on his kitchen counter, a printout of an unfamiliar email address. Something innocuous, but not one I'd seen him use. Next, I tried that was a trail. A faint digital footprint scattered across forums, group messages, encrypted message boards. The kind that hid in plain sight, and on all of them, Jack was active. What I found horrified me. Not in the way I expected. Not criminal, not obviously evil. But disturbing nonetheless. He was part of a network. They called themselves the Fathom, a cryptic name that meant nothing on the surface, but was repeated like a brand. They weren't a cult, not exactly. Not political, not religious, but they shared stories. Deep, intimate stories. And not in the healing way. These were confessions. Tales of deception, manipulation, destruction. Each post read like a badge of honor. No names, just acts. People boasted about the lies they'd told, the trust they'd broken, the facades they'd maintained. It wasn't for money. It wasn't even for control. It was for the art of the lie itself. And my brother, Jack, was one of their most respected contributors. He posted regularly, under layers of encryption. I wouldn't have known it was him if not for a small detail in one of his posts. He mentioned an event from our childhood. A story about a neighbor's dog, a broken window, and a lie he told that saved us both from punishment. Only we knew that story. And now it was there, dressed up, anonymized, offered as an early example of his talent. I felt like vomiting. My hands trembled as I read it. The way he dissected the moment described the thrill, the precision. There was no remorse in his words, only analysis. I couldn't talk to anyone. Who could I tell? My brother has an alter ego and writes essays about emotionally dismantling people for fun. No one would believe it. And part of me didn't want them to, because if someone else knew, it would make it real. Still, I couldn't let it go. I kept watching. Every night reading new posts, decoding new messages. I learned the lexicon of the Fathom, the symbols they used, the rituals they valued. They had rankings. They had mentors. They even met in person sometimes. Secret fogs, they called them. Like clouds where identities blurred. I found a list of past fogs in encrypted files someone had forgotten to delete properly, and one location matched the building I'd followed Liam to. Jack wasn't just a member. He was organizing these events. I didn't sleep much anymore. My grades slipped. My social life collapsed. But I didn't care. The more I read, the more I needed to know. And then one day, I saw something that changed everything. A new post. Different tone, less triumphant, more cautious. Almost paranoid. Jack was talking about someone close to him. Someone who had started asking questions. The post didn't mention a name, but the description was too specific. Younger sibling. Curious. Always watching. He described the feeling of being hunted in reverse, of knowing someone was trailing him but not yet sure how much they knew. It was me. He was writing about me. I stared at the screen, the words blurring. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it. My mouth went dry. I realized I wasn't the only one tracking. He was too, and he was better at it. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him? Should I run? Delete everything and pretend I never saw it. But then I noticed something at the bottom of his post, a cryptic signature code that wasn't usually there. It looked like a file name. I searched for it through backdoors I'd learned to use, and it led to a hidden archive. One I hadn't accessed before. It was filled with audio files. Dozens of them, each labeled with a date and a time. And when I played the first one, I nearly dropped my laptop. It was my voice, not from recent days, old recordings, from childhood, from our teenage years, conversations we'd had in the living room, in the car, in the backyard. All recorded. I went through more. Some were of our parents, some of his friends, all meticulously logged, filed, categorized. He hadn't just been lying. He'd been studying all of us for years. The next time we met, I couldn't look at him the same way. We had lunch. He ordered soup. I watched his every move, every word. I knew now that everything he said was curated. Nothing was accidental. He asked me how school was, how life was going, and I answered like I was reading from a script. I didn't dare deviate. I wondered if he could tell, if he noticed the shift in my tone, the distance in my eyes. After that, I stopped responding to his messages. I needed space, but he didn't push. He waited. Weeks passed, then months, silence. And then one night I came home to find a letter on my desk, no envelope, just a single page typed with no signature. It read, "You see more than I expected. I'm impressed, but be careful. Truth is a dangerous thing to chase. It doesn't come alone. It brings consequences. I always protected you. Don't make me choose." That was all. I kept that letter hidden in a book only I read. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't tell if it was a threat or a warning or something else entirely. I considered going to the police. With what? A letter with no fingerprints. Recordings that might have been taken legally. A secret forum where no real crime was committed. I had nothing solid. Just shadows. So I did the only thing I could. I played his game. I stopped going to classes and took a job as a temp at the company where he worked. Different department. Different floor. He didn't know at first. I made sure of it. I dyed my hair, grew a beard, used a different name on the ID badge. My role gave me limited access, but enough to start pulling internal memos, scheduling data, visitor logs. I built a map of his day, when he arrived, when he left, who he spoke to. I found a woman he often met with in private. No record of her employment. She never used the same entrance twice. I followed her one evening, and she led me not to a home, but to a storage facility on the edge of the city. Inside, I found what could only be described as a vault. Not just physical. Digital, biometric locks, surveillance, and all of it tied back to him. Documents, dossiers, videos, files on dozens, maybe hundreds of people. He was collecting lives, stories, weaknesses, and not just for fun anymore. This was organized, weaponized. That was when I realized Liam, no, Jack, wasn't just playing a game. He was running something. Something large. And the deeper I went, the clearer it became. I was no longer on the outside looking in. I was inside something I could no longer escape. It started to feel like my life wasn't mine anymore. Every decision I made, every step I took, was filtered through the lens of, what would he do if he found out? I had infiltrated his world, tiptoed into the edges of the labyrinth he had built, and now I was lost somewhere in the middle. The files I'd found in that storage unit weren't just curious memorabilia or trophies from his manipulations. They were living records. Active, constantly updated, and terrifying in their precision. Birth dates, passwords, psychological profiles. People I didn't even know. Some looked like politicians. Others were just average citizens. One was my high school chemistry teacher. Another was a family friend we hadn't spoken to in years. All categorized, all watched. I went home that night and erased my laptop, my phone. Anything that could tie back to what I'd done. I knew it was too late to undo the access I'd gained, but I could at least minimize the digital trail. I even considered going dark, disappearing, changing my name, cutting off contact. But the part of me that wanted answers was louder than the part that wanted safety. I needed to know why he was doing this, not just how. The how was terrifying, yes, but it was methodical, learnable. The why? His motivation. That was the part I couldn't let go of. I thought about our childhood, the little moments that seemed harmless then, but now took on a sinister hue. The way he always knew how to diffuse a fight before it escalated. How he could charm adults instantly. How he'd once convinced an entire room of family friends that I had broken the vase he had smashed. I remembered the way he'd whispered, "Trust me," when I was 5 and scared to lie to Mom. I remembered believing him. Now I wondered if that was the first test. Over the following weeks, I noticed changes, not just in myself, sleep-deprived, paranoid, frayed at the edges, but in the world around me. People I didn't know began noticing me. Noticing in the wrong way. A man in a gray hoodie watched me from across the subway platform 3 days in a row. A woman with red hair seemed to show up at every coffee shop I frequented. I wasn't being subtle anymore, and I wasn't alone. He knew, somehow he knew. Then my apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken. No signs of forced entry, but drawers had been moved. My closet slightly reorganized. The light bulb in the hallway unscrewed just enough not to turn on. A message, not a robbery. He was telling "May I see you?" I could have done worse. I stopped going home after that. Slept in motels, used different names, paid in cash. It gave me time to think, time to work. I hacked into a burner laptop and started going deeper into the Fathom's digital infrastructure. Most of it was decentralized, designed to avoid collapse if any single node was destroyed. But patterns emerged. Names repeated. Users commented more frequently. And in the middle of it all, a user who never posted but always moderated, BLIK2UT01. He had been there from the beginning. Every thread passed through his review. Every new member vetted by him. No messages ever directed at him, but everyone responded to in some way. I knew it was Liam. Jack. Whatever he wanted to be called. And if I couldn't reach him through confrontation, maybe I could reach him through the one thing he respected: performance. I created a new identity. A mask. I spent days crafting a digital persona, complete with its own set of stories, confessions, lies. I needed to get noticed, but not too quickly. That would be suspicious. So I became someone else. Cost. A silent observer turned enthusiastic contributor. I wrote pieces that felt real. Not mine, but close enough to echo truth. I borrowed from friends, from exes, from things I'd overheard in passing. I told of betrayal, of manipulation, of small victories in the theater of deceit. I watched the metrics carefully. After post 12, I was tagged, flagged for potential, invited to an inner channel. That's where the real horrors began. This group wasn't just exchanging stories anymore. They were coordinating. Real targets, real people. Weaknesses outlined like data points. It was a marketplace of control. You want influence over your boss. Here's how. You want to make someone disappear from your company? Here's a step-by-step plan. And all of it was done with this unspoken rule of never ask why. Motive was irrelevant. Only the precision of the manipulation mattered. The others loved my posts. They praised me, elevated me. One even said, "You remind me of Jack." I almost dropped my coffee when I read it. The irony was suffocating, but it worked. I was granted direct access to BLAFTU-01, a private chat. Just a few lines, he messaged first. "Your mirror is clean, but your ghost is flawed. You're not hiding from me." My breath caught. He knew, of course, he knew, and he was playing with me. "Why are you doing this?" I wrote. "You're not ready for the answer." I stared at those words for hours. That was it. No further messages. Just that. I didn't log in for 3 days. I couldn't. I felt violated, exposed, unprepared. But then a package arrived at the motel. No return address. Inside was a USB stick and a single typed note. "If you want the answer, watch this. Then choose." I almost threw it away. I should have. But I didn't. The USB contained a single video file. Grainy, timestamped 6 years ago. I clicked play. It opened on our childhood home. A wide shot from across the street. Then it zoomed in through a window. Our parents were arguing. Loud, bitter, words I couldn't hear. Then my mother slapped my father. Hard. He retaliated, something I'd never believed he was capable of. The camera cut to another window. Me, younger, playing with action figures. Oblivious. Then Liam entered the frame, stood at the door, watching, not interfering, just watching, unblinking. The video cut again. Different date. Same house. Our father leaving, suitcase in hand. Our mother crying. Liam alone in the garage, writing in a notebook. Then another clip. A funeral. Small. Rainy. My grandmother's. Liam spoke, but the audio didn't pick up. Just the look on his face. Calm. Cold. Detached. Then the final clip. A dark room. A voice. His voice. Speaking softly into a recorder. They don't understand. None of them. They operate on emotion. I operate on design. I'm not cruel. I'm precise. And one day he'll understand too. He has to. Because if he doesn't, everything I've built will collapse. And I will have to break him. The video ended. My hands shook. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about power. It was about me. He'd been preparing me. Testing me. The watching how far I would go. The forum, the warnings, the access. None of it was accidental. He had curated every step. And now I stood at the edge of a line I never intended to cross. The next day, I found another note, taped to my car windshield. "Know that you've seen what I've seen. Do you finally understand what I've done?" He wanted me to become him, to replace him, or to try and stop him and fail so he could perfect the system even further. I wasn't sure which was worse. But one thing was certain. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was inviting me in. And the deeper I went, the less I could tell where his story ended and mine began. The next morning, I didn't recognize my own reflection. Not because my face had changed, but because the eyes staring back weren't mine. They belonged to someone else, someone calculating. Someone broken open and filled with something dark and sharp. I splashed cold water on my face like it could wash away the truth, but it clung to me like oil. Every hour since watching that video had unspooled another thread inside me. This wasn't just a secret life my brother had lived. This was a map he'd drawn, and every twist and corner led back to me. I couldn't tell when the line between observer and participant had disappeared. But I was in now. Deep. I'd stepped through the door and left it swinging behind me. And what haunted me most wasn't that I couldn't turn back. It was that I wasn't sure I wanted to, because there was a strange kind of clarity in this world he'd built. a cruel, crystalline logic. Everything had a reason, every lie a purpose. No mess, no noise, only precision. And after a lifetime of wondering why my family never quite made sense, why love felt distant, why Liam's eyes always saw through me, I finally had an answer. He hadn't just manipulated strangers. He had designed me. Every memory I revisited now came with a second version, a shadow scene playing beneath it. The time he helped me with my science project, I found a recording in his archive titled Early Trial Influence Over Self-Perception. The time he bailed me out after I wrecked Mom's car, logged as Stage 2 Dependency Reinforcement. He had engineered every major event in my life to test my reactions, to measure, tweak, observe. I was his prototype, not just a brother, a thesis, and I hated him for it. But more than that, I wanted to understand how he had done it so well. I didn't go back to school, didn't call my friends. I moved from modal to modal, working in the dark, feeding the forum on the name IRRGOST. Each post I shared became more elaborate, more cold. They weren't true, not at first. But then they started to be. I began manipulating people, small things at first. A neighbor at one of the motels. I made him believe someone had been entering his room while he slept. I moved his key, slightly shifted his belongings each day. Watched the paranoia bloom like mold. It was horrifying. It was thrilling. I wasn't just tracing Liam's path anymore. I was making my own. One night, I received another message from BLXTRU as Olawandra, congratulations. Ghosts don't reflect anymore, they haunt. That was it. No explanation, no instruction. Just a marker. I'd crossed another invisible threshold. And with it came access to something deeper, a hidden server. A vault within the Fathom. Files on operatives, clients, victims. I saw names I recognized from the news. Scandals that had, accidentally, come to light. Promotions won by sabotage. Marriages quietly dissolved. And every thread tied back to the group's influence. This wasn't theoretical. The Fathom had teeth. And my brother was its architect. I started noticing patterns. Algorithms running beneath the interactions, emotional formulas dressed up as social charm. The whole thing ran like a machine. A human manipulation engine, and somewhere in its core, I found a project labeled SWAYNTSS. At first, it was locked. But after a week of decrypting and breaking layers of protection, I got in. It was all about me. SWAYNTHIS was a multi-year case study. Behavioral logs, risk assessments, neural maps based on psychoanalytic profiles. Every message I'd sent, every photo I'd posted, every decision I'd made was documented. But the final entry wasn't authored by Liam, it was by me. A file dated the same day I found the USB. I hadn't written it. But it was my voice in the audio transcription. I see it now. The beauty in the design, the art in control. This is what truth looks like. Cruel, clean, complete. And maybe that's what I was afraid of all along, not losing myself. But realizing I was never mine to begin with. I slammed the laptop shut, pacing the room like it could shake off the unease. Had he deepfaked my voice, anticipated every word, or worse, had I said it in some fevered blackout, a moment when I wasn't sure who I was? I started recording myself, leaving audio logs, not to remember, but to monitor. I no longer trusted my own memory. I wasn't even sure if I was real anymore or just another narrative node in Liam's grand design. Had I ever made a single free decision, or had he just opened doors he knew I'd walk through? I needed answers, real ones, so I went back to the source, our parents' house. I hadn't been there in months, not since all of this started, but I had questions only they could answer. I arrived just after dark, the lights still on in the kitchen. My mother opened the door, surprised but not alarmed. She hadn't heard from Liam either, she said. Not in weeks. Said he'd vanished after a job transfer. I asked her about his childhood, his behavior, if anything ever seemed off. She shook her head, defensive. He was always special, different, sure, but gifted. I pressed harder. About the recordings, the manipulation. She looked away. Her silence told me everything. He used to record us, she finally whispered. When he was 10, I found a tape recorder under our bed. He said it was for a school project. Or was it? I asked. She shook her head. I don't think anything ever was. That night, I found the attic key and went upstairs. I remembered the attic as a dusty, forgotten space full of boxes and broken toys. But it had changed. There was insulation now, shelves lined with notebooks, data printouts, and files. Files on us. I found one labeled Mother Emotional Consistency Index. Another, Father Departure Predictability Scenarios. But the thickest folder was labeled simply Gios 201. Inside were photographs of me, from every age, printed emails, school essays, report cards annotated with strange red marks I couldn't interpret. A list of relationships, friends, crushes, enemies, each one with notes. Like Emily short-term ally. Over attaches. Useful for guilt manipulation. Mr. Chan, authority figure, seeks approval. Target for transferal projection, but each one was graded. My life reduced to an experiment. A blueprint. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope. I opened it. Inside was a single sentence typed on every paper. The next test begins when you open this. No instructions. No map. Just inevitability. I burned everything. Not because I wanted to erase it, but because I knew that if I didn't, I would follow it. Obsess. Decode every word, every plan. The fire was the only mercy I could give myself. But even as the flames consumed the paper, the smell of ink and old fear filling the attic, I knew it wasn't over. It would never be over. 2 days later, I received an invitation in my inbox. Anonymous sender, no subject, just coordinates, and a phrase, final fog. All masks fall. I didn't need to ask what it was. It was the Fathom's ultimate gathering, a summit, a stage, a confrontation. I packed a bag, printed photos, burned backups of everything I'd collected. I wasn't going there to run, or to reason. I was going to end it, or become it, because at this point, I wasn't sure which fate scared me more. The coordinates led to an abandoned observatory deep in the forest, 2 hours north of the city. The kind of place where sound dies in the trees and even your thoughts feel like they echo too loud. I arrived just after midnight. The moon was thin and white like a blade, barely cutting through the thick mist that curled around the broken fence and rusting dome of the observatory. The final fog, that's what they'd called it. And fog it was. Dense, silencing, alive. As I stepped through it, every instinct in me screamed to run. But I didn't, because this was the only way forward. I parked the car in a clearing surrounded by twisted trees and walked the last 100 meters alone, carrying nothing but the black satchel with my evidence, my files, my last hope. The entrance was cracked open, revealing a staircase that spiraled up into darkness. I climbed, each step creaking like it was remembering all the weight it had ever held. When I reached the top, I expected fanfare. Some kind of welcome. But there was nothing. Just a room washed in pale blue light from ancient projectors, casting looping footage on the cracked walls. Images of people arguing, hugging, crying. Real moments, spliced and edited, no sound, just rhythm. There were 12 chairs arranged in a circle, 10 were filled. And one, directly across from me, was empty. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like professors, accountants, baristas. People you'd sit next to on a train and forget instantly. But each of them had eyes like knives, still, reflective, waiting. No one spoke. Not at first. Then a man in a wool coat nodded toward the empty seat. He's not late. The woman beside him said, he's watching. They all turned their heads slightly, as if listening for footsteps. But I knew better. Lamb wasn't walking in from the cold. He was already here. A speaker crackled from the shadows. You've arrived, his voice said, smooth as ever, unbothered. I told them you would. The others looked at me now, not with malice, not even with suspicion, with expectation, as if I were the final move in a game they'd been playing for years. You've played well, Liam's voice continued. But games only end when someone admits defeat. Have you? I stepped forward, dropped the satchel in the center of the circle. I didn't come here to play. A silence. Then the sound of slow clapping echoed from the rafters. The projector light flickered. A panel on the wall opened with a hiss, and from it he emerged, not a ghost, Not a shadow, just Liam. A little older, a little leaner, dressed in black from collar to boots. But his face, God, his face, was still the same one I'd grown up watching across dinner tables, across birthdays and holidays. Except now, the mask was gone, there was no warmth, no pretense, just precision. He took the empty chair and folded his hands. "Do you understand now?" he asked. I nodded. "You built this, not just the Fathom. Me, everything. I optimized," he said. "You were raw potential. I gave it purpose." And I threw the satchel at his feet. "You stole my life." He didn't flinch. "I shaped it. You lived in a world of chaos, emotion, noise. I taught you clarity. The others remained still." This wasn't a debate. This was a ritual. "Why me?" I asked. "Why make me the center?" He smiled faintly. "Because I needed to know if it could be done. If truth could be engineered, not just discovered. If someone born in noise could be tuned to signal." But my mouth was dry. "You don't see people, do you? Just patterns?" "No," he said softly. "I see people too clearly. That's the problem. Once you see the gears, it's impossible to believe in magic." I took a breath. "Then let's test your design." He tilted his head. "I'm here to dismantle you. Everything you built. I've copied the entire network, its members, its methods, its real-world operations. I've backed it all up. Encrypted it, fragmented it, and sent it to multiple dead man switches. If anything happens to me, it goes public." That got their attention. The circle stirred. A few exchanged glances. For the first time, Liam's expression flickered. "Clever," he said, "but not original. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to work." He stood slowly. The others did too, in unison, like they'd rehearsed it. He walked toward me, stopping a breath away. "I didn't bring you here to stop you," he said. "I brought you here to finish the test." "Bah? What test?" "To see whether you'd betray me or become me." A low hum began in the walls. Projectors whirred louder. The footage on the walls shifted. My face at different ages, in different places. Home videos I'd never seen. Surveillance from apartments, streets, cafes. A lifetime of footage. Curated. Categorized. "You already passed the first phase," he said. "You found the truth. You entered the system. You learned to manipulate." I shook my head. "I did it to stop you. Did you?" His eyes narrowed. "Or did you do it because it felt right?" I tried to answer, but the words caught. "Do you know what scientism really is?" he asked. "It's not a case study, it's a handoff. I built the framework. But I needed someone to run it." I froze. "You're leaving." He nodded. "I've taken it as far as I can. The Fathom has grown too big for a single architect. It needs a successor, someone born from it." But he gestured to the others. They agreed. "You're more than ready." The room was spinning. "You want me to take over?" "No," he said. "I want you to choose. Walk away and everything ends. We dissolve, disappear, or step forward and become the future." It was a trap. I knew it, but it was also true. He reached into the satchel and pulled out the USB I'd labeled failsafe. He held it between his fingers. "Funny thing," he said. "This doesn't even matter. You think power lives in files, in blackmail. No, power lives in belief, in structure. The moment you believe in something enough to burn the world for it, that's when it becomes real." I stepped back. "I don't want this." "But you already are this," he whispered. He held out his hand. "End it or own it, bought." Silence. The projector showed a new image. Me from 2 days ago, standing over a burning box. The files. The attic. The last part of my innocence. And I realized he was right. I'd already made my choice. But which one? I looked at the USB, then at him, then at the circle of believers, and I laughed. A bitter, broken laugh. Because the twist wasn't that he had turned me into a monster. The twist was that I wasn't sure it was a bad thing. I stood there with the USB in my hand, cold and light, as if it didn't contain the weight of everything we had both become. The projector kept playing images of my life, each one curated like a museum exhibit. Liam's eyes never left mine. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. just waited, perfectly still, perfectly patient, like he knew how this would end because he'd already calculated every variable. But the truth was, so had I. I had prepared for this moment more thoroughly than he realized. He wasn't the only one who could build a system, who could plan 10 moves ahead. He had tested me, yes, manipulated me, pushed me to the edge. But in doing so, he had taught me too much. Because now I could see every layer of him. I could anticipate the beat before he struck the drum. The people in the circle watched me, not with judgment, but with reverence. They weren't cultists. They were strategists, analysts of humanity. They believed in control the way others believed in salvation. And now they believed in me. I closed my hand around the USB. I accept, I said. A breath passed through the room like wind through glass. Then nods. Slow, affirming nods. Liam's smile was faint, but it was real. I knew you would, he said. But not for the reason you think, I added. I dropped the USB back into the satchel and zipped it shut. You taught me everything about control, about manipulation, about the architecture of truth. And you were right about one thing. Power doesn't live in files. It lives in belief. Bob, he tilted his head, curious, amused. So you believe in the system now? I shook my head. No, I believe in you. Or at least I used to. But the projector flickered and the footage on the wall began to change again. But this time, not to me, not to the past. Now it showed live images, feeds from cameras hidden around the observatory, outside in the forest, down the road where my car had been. Tactical teams in black, moving silently, coordinated. Liam's smile vanished. You think I'd come here alone? I asked. After everything, you think I'd burn my life and walk into your temple without backup? His eyes narrowed. He stood. You brought the authorities. I laughed once. No, I brought something better. Your own recruits. The people in the circle shifted. Two stood slowly, removing tiny earpieces. One of them, an older man with weathered hands, stepped forward. Confirmed visual, he said into his wrist. Target identified. Proceed. Liam turned, stunned. You weren't the only one recruiting, I said. The Fathom didn't just attract the power-hungry. It attracted people like me. People you underestimated. People who learned how to fake belief better than you taught. Sirens blared in the distance. A countdown buzzed through the speakers. This isn't possible, he muttered. They're loyal. They've been loyal for years. I stepped closer. No, Liam. They were watching, waiting. Just like I was. You thought you were the god of this machine. But the gears have turned without you. Your systems are obsolete. Your designs are legacy code. You made me your prototype, but I became your upgrade. He moved toward the satchel, but I kicked it back away from him. Too late, I said. Everything's been transmitted, the Fathom's full map. Clients, methods, internal networks. It's already in the hands of those who will dismantle it, bot. Panic finally reached his eyes. The first genuine human expression I'd seen in him in years. This won't stop it, he said. Even if they shut us down, there'll be others. The truth can't be caged. I nodded. I know. That's why I didn't just destroy a bot. What do you mean? I took out a second USB from my jacket. I copied the Fathom's design, rewrote the code, purged the data, removed the poison. But he froze. You built a weapon, I said. I built a mirror. He tried to grab it, but I stepped back. You don't get to use this anymore. You don't get to control what comes next. Dahi laughed then. A bitter, broken thing. You really think you're different? I looked him straight in the eye. No, I think I'm worse. The doors burst open. Armed agents flooded the room, shouting commands. The circle dissolved, hands raised. Liam didn't resist. He just looked at me, smiling again. But this time, it was the smile of a man watching his house burn down, knowing the blueprints are still hidden in his head. They cuffed him, dragged him past me. He leaned in close as they passed. This isn't the end. I know, I whispered. It's the reset, but he was gone. The room emptied. The fog outside had begun to clear. I stood alone in the observatory, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he had built and everything I had become. I should have felt victorious, triumphant. But all I felt was cold, because deep down I knew the truth. He hadn't lost, he'd evolved. The new USB, the one I had rewritten, was safe in my jacket pocket, a system still intact, a framework untouched, a network of tools not for manipulation, but for transparency, for defense. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. But as I left the observatory, the fog finally parting to reveal a pale dawn, I felt it begin. That same silence that had lived in Liam for years. The stillness, the calculation, the clarity, the echo of something that used to be him, now alive in me. And I realized the final lie wasn't his. It was mine, because I hadn't destroyed the Fathom. I'd inherited it. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.